So we're going to talk about anxiety and its triggers. First thing to know about anxiety, and this is debatable in the trade, but most psychologists will say that almost all anxiety is rooted in fear. So when you talk about fear or phobias, you're really talking about the cause or the genesis of the feeling of anxiety. So if you can think of it in terms of layers, anxiety is on the top, and it's the symptom that comes from the underlying fear. So one of the things we're going to try to encourage you to do, again, without becoming diagnosticians or therapists, is to try to, when you encounter a student with anxiety, you're going to try to determine what's the cause of that anxiety. Because if there's something on program that's manageable, for example, if you can take, I had a student I was talking to last year who was scared to death to go on the water rafting trip in Costa Rica. And so, when they removed that as a requirement, the anxiety went away and the rest of the program was fine. But the fear that caused the anxiety was the thought about the terror of getting in that raft and going down the rapids. Remove the fear, you remove the anxiety. Now, does it always go that smoothly? Is that really easy? Well, not always, but often that's the case. So we want to try to understand anxiety as a symptom of a greater cause. And again, without encouraging you to try to dig deep and do psychoanalysis on this person, we just want you to be able to maybe ask them some open-ended questions. And we'll model some of that when we sit down and do the role plays. But in short, what we can say is, so you're feeling very anxious. Have you felt this before? Where have you felt that before? And what you're after in those questions is, can you identify kind of a pattern of things that have prompted this anxiety before? If you're feeling anxious, what does it feel like? Ask them questions about how it's manifesting physically, emotionally, mentally. But fear can be almost anything. As you can see from the slide, animals, insects, being away from home, authority, flying, the unknown or the unfamiliar, social situations. And you can see that many of those might show up on program with a participant who is, just confronting for the first time what it's like to be away from home, for example. Or they're confronting a foreign food, an unknown substance, so the fear of the unknown. So there are many triggers for anxiety, but the most important thing to note is that anxiety is a symptom, and it's triggered most often by a phobia. You'll also experience or witness traumatic events. Any of us have, all of us have, perhaps, especially now that we have social media and TV. We've all experienced a traumatic event, if not personally, by way of a video screen. And those traumatic events lodge themselves deep in the psyche as images and pictures and videos that a situation in the present can trigger. It can trigger that kind of subconscious image or video, and all of a sudden we're having in the moment a feeling of anxiety. And that's all because we've reconnected to that image that has been so traumatic for us. Or a memory can also do that. Remembering that a personally traumatic event in one's past, which may have been triggered by an event in the present, as I just mentioned. Sometimes when students are out of their routine, and they're in a foreign land, and they're dealing with all sorts of unknowns, trigger memories can come up about other traumatic events, and all of a sudden you're dealing with an anxious situation. But again, let me emphasize, the goal isn't to try to diagnose or to psychoanalyze or to, take apart in some great detail what the cause is. It's simply to try to help the student realize that, the anxiety has a reason. Because one of the most frightening things about anxiety is, I don't know why I have it. So we want to help them understand there is a reason. So let's try to figure that out. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Anxiety signs and symptoms. What does anxiety look like when it's presenting? Increased heart rate, breathing, hyperventilating. You can see the body shift, shaking, pale, cool, or clammy skin. If you were to touch them or shake their hand, you would feel this. Trouble focusing. Sometimes, someone who was, 5 minutes ago before the anxiety hit, able to focus on something, all of a sudden they're like tangential. They can't focus on anything at the same time. They can't stay with something. Dizziness, lightheadedness, physical tremors, fainting, temporary loss of consciousness, which resolves relatively quickly. Now, if somebody faints and they don't get up real quickly. It may not be anxiety. Anxiety that actually restricts the blood flow to the brain, and it can, and make someone faint. Often that's a very quick faint and quick recovery. If it's not a quick recovery, you might be dealing with something else. Stomach distress, chest tightness or pain, tingling sensations, excessive fear reactions, fight or flight responses. You see them very nervous and darting with their eyes and their head around like they're, and by the way, this particular symptom is very common of a panic attack. A panic attack, separate from anxiety, is a close in time, very specific sort of reaction to a stimulus. Could be anything. But the panic is so powerful that it can result in any of these symptoms or a combination of them. Compulsive rituals or thoughts interfering with ability to function. Sometimes anxiety flows into OCD behavior, obsessive compulsive disorders, or not disorders, but obsessive compulsive symptoms, and it can be, anxiety can be observed as, okay, they need to try to reestablish control by doing the same thing over and over again, or establishing some kind of a routine that grounds them back into some sense that there's ground under their feet. So now what we're going to do is go into some role play and try to illustrate how you might work with someone who's struggling with anxiety. So in this role play, Dave and I are going to be working out an anxiety scenario. So I'm the program leader, program manager, and Dave is the student participant, and he's experiencing some anxiety. And this is the front end of a program. This is the beginning of a program. And I've noticed with Dave that he's fine when he's like active and he's involved and doing activities. But when he's alone, there's kind of he kind of pulls back and he isolates. And he kind of fidgets with his hands a lot, and there's kind of a nervous sadness about him. And so I'm wanting to inquire about that. So I've just kind of pulled him aside, and I'm just interested to talk with him like I was in the depressive scenario about what's going on with him during program. So Dave, thanks for taking a few minutes. How's it going on program so far for you?
Oh, good.
Yeah. I notice that when you're, as we talked, when you're doing stuff and you're active and you're involved with the people and your fellow participants, things are good. You seem to be engaged and active and aware and kind of on fire. But then, when the activity ends, I notice that you kind of pull away and you kind of go away from the crowd. And I'm wondering if you're feeling in those moments kind of isolated or alone. What's going on in those times?
I just feel like everybody's kind of doing their own thing. They all like each other, but I'm not a part of that. So I just kind of, do my own thing.
Mm-hmm. So you don't really, what I hear you saying is you don't really feel like you can be part of the group when there's not an activity that brings you all together?
Yeah, they just have a lot in common. They all play sports and I don't. Yeah.
What happens at home in a similar situation? Say you're at school and you have an activity, but then you're not in that activity. Do you feel the same way? Do you feel like everybody's doing their thing and you're not?
Yeah, I don't really hang out with friends much. I kind of go to school and then come home and get on my computer.
How is it at home? I mean, do you feel like you're connected to your family? Do you live with your family? How does it go at home?
Yeah, family's good. I don't have many friends, but family's great.
So there's not like brothers and sisters bullying you or anything like that?
No, not brothers and sisters bullying me.
Not brothers and sisters, but are some people at school maybe?
Yeah. I get picked on a lot, I guess. So I don't kind of put myself out there very much.
What do they pick on you about?
They just call me dork and I don't know, other things, but it's a lot.
Oh, that's gotta hurt.
Yeah.
Has any of that happened here?
No. No, but again, when we're doing things together, it's fine because you're there and you're helping to put us all together. But then when I go to my room or whatever, yeah, nobody's bullying me. I just don't feel like I fit in.
So I've noticed, sometimes when you're alone, you're fidgeting with your hands and you're kind of tamping your feet, and it seems like there's a lot of energy in you. Like, do you feel anxious in those moments when you're alone?
Nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, oftentimes an anxiety is coming up as a symptom from fear, like a fear of something. And I'm wondering if there's maybe a fear of not being accepted. Like if you tried to insinuate yourself into a group, you wouldn't be accepted. Is there a kind of a fear of rejection, maybe?
Yeah, I just kind of assume they're a lot like the people at home, that pick on me. So
Yeah.
I'm a little nervous. I'm all by myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm. But if you were to say that there's something that you might be afraid of, and is there any fear that you could pinpoint? Maybe not, but I'm just curious.
I just think meeting new people makes me nervous.
Mm-hmm.
I always feel they're going to judge me.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I think might help as you go throughout the program in the coming weeks, and maybe even as you go home, is to remember that there are people who are safe in this world. There are people that if you let yourself expose yourself to them, they would be friendly, compassionate, engaging, open. Not everybody, certainly. But I think you'll find some people here that are like that. And there's a great thing in psychology that if you, I had a guy tell me one time, if you have one experience with one person that's really positive and you feel validated, that means that there's probably a ton more out there that'll provide that for you, but you got to be open to it. I know it could be hard for you on program to do that, but I'd really encourage you to remain open and engaging and pay attention to the fear of engagement, because that fear can grip you and really shut you down.
Okay.
And I'm happy to talk with you throughout the program about this if you'd like.
Okay.
Okay?
Cool. I'll give it a shot.
Great. Awesome. In the role play for social anxiety, the goals are active listening, getting to the core issue, understanding the fear that drives the symptom of anxiety, creating with student a non-anxious environment while on the program, and as a potential model for student to take home, we try to model for them on program what they might do to help them when they get back. We're going to talk about bipolar, what's often known as manic depression. And this will show up as a student is kind of oscillating between a very, very energetic self-presentation and a very, very depressive one. Now that's the extreme. There's all sorts of nuances across the spectrum. So a student can be sort of sad and then kind of happy. But there is an observable line that you notice, and it's like you can see that it's not just a nice flow between sadness and excitement. It's like a kind of a cut. And oftentimes a student will be medicated for this if it's determined to be a biochemical issue. Other times they're not medicated, but 9 times out of 10, bipolar or manic depression is a biochemical and or genetic issue that needs to be managed with medication. So one of the first questions you can ask is, are you on medication? Once you've kind of confronted whether or not they might be bipolar, you can ask the question about medication. Basically, there's kind of 2 kinds of bipolar. One is the rapid cycling. That is, they go from the manic, energetic phase to the depressive phase pretty quickly. The other way is kind of a broad spectrum or longer periods between the mania and the depression. And you can observe this, for example, they might get up in the morning and they're just really hyper and very energetic. And as the day goes on, you find that by 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, they've fallen into kind of a melancholy funk. And you can't really determine why. That can indicate potentially a bipolar or manic depressive kind of episode.